Welcome to Lecture 2. The main subject of this lecture is wizards and files. Now, the objectives for this lecture are Oracle Forms Developer Components, Oracle Form Files, Running a Form, the Data Block Wizard, and the Layout Wizard. Now, you'll see in your menu under Oracle Forms, you've got three main components, and that's what I'm showing you here, the icons. And that's Forms Builder, Forms Compiler, and Forms Runtime. Now, each of the different developer products, Oracle Reports, and Oracle Graphics, they also have these three different components. And now I'm going to go over each of those different components and what they mean and what it means to work with them. And then when you're finished watching this lecture, you'll go through the demo, and then it'll be clearer to you because you'll actually see the three different versions, and you'll get a sense of what each one means and how they work. So the first one is the Forms Builder, and this is mainly what you're working in. And this is the environment where you're building the form in. And this is the one that has a lot of different components that shows you the properties of the form that you're working on, sort of what it looks like when it runs, but not really authentically. And and then a list of all the elements. So basically the file extension that you have here is going to be FMB, and that stands for Form Builder. Now, Forms Builder, you can also create your menus here. These actually have a different file extension, and that would be the MMB file. We're going to cover menus in Chapter 13. And then library modules, which are PL SQL client-side procedures and functions that's in a PL SQL library. We'll cover that in one of the later chapters, and those are PLL files. PLL meaning when you're in the Forms Builder. And then object libraries, which are collections of objects that you can use across multiple forms. We'll discuss this more in some of the future lectures too. And those always have an OLB file extension. Now, Forms Compiler is where you actually take the form from Forms Builder, the FMB, and you create a different file type. And this is a smaller file type that you can run. And this creates platform-specific executables. And these have an extension of FMX for the form that correlates to the FMB, MMX for the menu that correlates to the MMB, which is the menu builder, and PLX, which would be the compiled PLL file. Now, you take those like the PLX, the FMX, the MMX, and then you run them in runtime. Now, runtime is the version of Forms where the client runs the application. I have a few more slides that goes into this in various details. Now, the runtime includes all the various dynamic link libraries, these are the DLL files, and the executable program which is required to run the forms. Now, the form developer, or what I mean here is like the programmer, what he needs to have on his computer would be Forms Builder to build a sample file, and he needs Forms Compiler to take that sample file, the sample FMB, and create the runnable form, the FMX. And he also needs to have Forms Runtime so that he can test it. And then he needs to have Net8, which is the Oracle component so that the tool can communicate with the database. The database can be anywhere. Now, if you are deploying these on the web, then that'll be slightly differently. But in terms of from the programmer's point of view, even if he's developing things for the web, he needs to develop it in the same way, and he needs all these different components. Now, the user, now this would be a client-server user. What that means is that they're not connecting through the internet, they're just using the network of the company or whatever. So the developer 6.0 user just needs to have the runtime, and he needs to have access to the FMX file only. And this does not necessarily have to be on his computer. It could be somewhere network directories, and then he needs the network 8 to connect to the database. There's a different architecture if you're going to be deploying these on the web, because when you're on the web, you will be connecting through the normal HTTP protocol, and then that will go through an application server to get to the database. So it's really the web server where you're calling the URL that you would type in, that then finds itself through the application server and then over to the database, and then it basically serves back the forms using the HTTP protocol. Now, this is a table which shows you all the different form types, the file types, and I'm going to go over that in a little more detail. Now, the first thing that I have here is a list of the different modules. So the modules here are all the different developer, because we have forms, menus, and libraries. Those are your main ones using Form Builder, but you also have reports, and what you'll see is we're also going to run reports from forms, so that's why we're covering reports just briefly in this lecture series. So the design files, once again, the form file is FMB, the menu file is MMB, the library is PLL, and the report is RDF. And what I mean by non-platform specific binary files, this is a binary file, which means if you open it up in TextPad, you see a bunch of crazy looking characters, which you can't read it. It's like a program that has to be run. That's one way of simple layman's view of a binary file. What I mean by not platform specific is that this file can be taken from like a Windows NT machine that you've created it on. You can take that FMB and you can take it over to a Unix system, and you don't have to convert it in any way, and that can be used over on the Unix Forms developer. And that's the same for the menus and libraries and reports. This is very important because as you start to move to a web-enabled system, you'll find that these days most of the web environments are using Unix systems. So you will be moving things back and forth to different development environments, possibly, and it's good to be aware of those different issues. So that's what I mean by non-platform specific. Now the text files, what this is there is a way of converting your binary file into a text format. Now, it's not really just a bunch of SQL and PL SQL. There's a whole lot of other properties in there. Most of the time, you don't really have to do that. But if you're having a hard time finding some hard-coded values, or you have like a path to a form that's being called and you can't seem to find it in the form, you could convert it into text and pull it out of there. Now, Oracle doesn't say this, but I have also found in strange circumstances where you're actually trying to convert backwards, which means that you have like a form 6.0 file, and for some reason you need to bring it down to forms 4.5. In some cases, you can do it by converting it to text and back. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But for the most part, the text files are something you're not really going to use that much. Now, the runtime version of the files, what this is this is the version of the file that has been compiled and been completely, when you're finished designing it, and this is what the user is really accessing. So the runtimes are platform specific. What this means is that if you're developing like in Windows environment, that's just the type of PC that you have as a programmer, but then you're deploying it on the web or in a Unix environment, then it's fine for you to develop it in on the Windows environment with the FMB. And then you have to take that FMB over to a Unix environment. You don't have to do anything to it. But when you're in the Unix environment, on the Unix machine, then you can compile into an FMX. And that will then be compiled into the format which is specific for the Unix. And likewise, if you had done it in Windows, on Windows. And of course, there are many other operating systems that will be used for. Now, when you run a form, there are a number of different ways to launch a form. when you're in Forms Builder, you can actually go through all these three different components of developer in one step. And that's this button, which looks like a traffic light. So when you're working in your form, you really should run the form every time you make a major change, especially in the beginning, because what you'll see is if you start adding a number of elements, you start writing a number of trigger code, and then the form doesn't work, and then it's very hard to figure out where the problem lay. So it's a good idea every time you add some elements to the form to test it. And you can do this by pressing on the traffic light icon, which means to run the form. What this does is it compiles the form, creates an FMX file. It'll create it in the same directory as your FMB file. And then it will actually launch the FMX file in Forms runtime, and it'll use the same database connection that you have from Forms Builder. So this is also a little easier for you. If you had taken the FMB, gone into Forms compiler to create the FMX, and then gone into the Forms runtime to run it, you would have actually had to log into the database 3 times in order to test your form. So this is a really nice feature that's in Forms Builder, that they have this the run button, which allows you to launch and go through all these steps all at once. Now, in runtime, there are a number of different modes that you have to be aware of. You'll get a better sense of this when you see the demo. And then you'll kind of really get a feel for it, because you'll see that different buttons in the standard buttons that appear on runtime, they kind of like they go gray, or they keep their colors, which means they can run. So the normal mode, now this is the mode when you first launch the database, and this is the default mode. And this is the mode in runtime. This is the mode for the user, where the user can create, update, and delete records. Now, the reason that the form really serves 2 purposes in runtime. It can be used like this to create, update, and delete records, but it can also be used to query, just to look at the different records. And then once you've queried it, you can go back and edit them. So it's important that you think about this and think about how you want to design your form for your users to take all these things into account, because some of these may not be intuitive to your users, and you can create different buttons besides the default buttons as a way to control that. So query mode means you're entering the query criteria, which means, let's say I just want to see all the students who have a first name that starts with B, and then that's my query criteria, is that the first name starts with B. And then fetch mode means after I've entered my query, now I want to fetch it. So what this diagram shows you is these are the different modes and how they work back and forth. Now, I know when you first take a look at this, it looks a little confusing, and I'm going to walk you through it. And then when you do the demo, you'll see me work through a live form and run through these different modes. You'll get a better sense of it. And then when you do the labs, you'll do it yourself, and you'll get a better feel for it. So don't worry about it. So when I say new form instance, this means up here on the upper left-hand corner, that's when you first start the form. So it's always going to start in normal mode. Now, what you will learn later is you can't control that. Forms are very flexible. So if you wanted it to start in a different mode, that would be possible. But we're just kind of looking at a vanilla form right now. So it starts in normal mode, and there's nothing there. Now, you could actually start to type, and that would be entering a new record, and you could save it. And then you would never leave that normal mode, that first circle that you see there. Now, if you decide that you're not entering a new record, but you're either going to query some records, or you're going to, make some changes to some existing records, you're going to look at some records, and then you're going to decide to put in some more records, which is probably what your users are going to do, right? So then you press this Enter Query button. Now you see there are 3 buttons, and what you'll see in runtime is, well, there's a whole series of buttons, but these 3 buttons are next to each other. And what you'll see is, see how the one on the right is gray when you first start, and that's kind of an indication that you're in normal mode. And then as soon as you hit the button with a question mark, that means you're going to leave normal mode and you're going to start query mode. And then you'll see that the buttons actually change color, and that button with the question mark will go gray, and the button with a little X will kind of come up. So what this means is you're now in query mode. Now there are two things you can do in query mode. You can go like, wait, I don't want to be in query. What am I doing? I want to go back and insert something. So you can cancel the query with that button on the far right. That's the one with the little X, and so that's the cancel query button, and that'll send you back to normal mode. Or if you want to enter your query criteria, you can go ahead and do that. For example, let's say you want to search for all those students with a first name that starts with B. You put the B and then the %sign. Remember, we're using the SQL-like find commands. Now you have to decide how you want to introduce this to your users, because they're probably used to using an asterisk as a wildcard, not a percentage sign, and also sometimes, depending on the item, you may have to put in quotation marks at the beginning or end. So you'll see that there are other ways of popping up help to the users, and there are ways of, there are many different ways of handling this. And so once you've typed in the query criteria, then you would press that middle button, which also has a question mark and like a little arrow. And so that means that you are launching the query according to those criteria, and then you're in that fetch. So what you're doing is you're kind of going through that fetch data mode. And now you have data in your form, but you're back into normal mode, which is why the arrow goes back there. And you can scroll through the different items, and you can make changes or deletions, and you're still in normal mode. You'll get a better sense of this as you watch the demo, which comes next, and as you do the labs yourself, and then you'll see how it works. And you really have to think of your users as being people who are not database programmers at all. So you have to decide how to design these different elements in a way that's going to be very clear for your users. Now the next thing that's just very important is the wizards. Now the wizards are a way to make the fundamental elements to your forms. Now these wizards are like wizards that you've probably used in Microsoft Word. There are many products that have wizards now. This is becoming really popular. And what the wizards do for you is they develop a lot of the key elements for you. What you'll see when we go into the forms developer environment is, at first sight, it's kind of confusing. There are lots of different nodes and there are lots of different properties. And if you were to develop a data block by yourself or manually, you'd have to remember to go through all those different steps, which in some cases you'll have to do. But for the basic vanilla items that you want to have, you can go through the wizard. And what the wizard will do is it'll walk you through, and it'll ask you a number of key questions, and you'll see like a little graphic, I don't know, a little graphic image that shows you what each thing looks like as you walk through, and that will give you a sense of the meaning of each step of the wizard. And then in the end, it'll create a lot of items and change the properties according to how you've responded to the items in the wizard. So the data block wizard basically creates a data block based on a database table, and that's to create the data block, which we discussed before in the main items in lecture 1. And the layout wizard, now this basically takes those items that you've created in the data block and it paints them on the canvas. So it asks you, which of those items in the data block do you want? Which canvas do you want it on? What type of a canvas? What order? What are prompts next to those items? What's the size? To get a sense of this, you really have to walk through each step of the wizard, and we're going to do that in the demo. So I'm not going to go through the steps in each of these wizards right now. So when you finish this up, I want you to run through the demo, and what you'll see is I'm going to create a simple form using the data block wizard and the layout wizard, and then I'm going to take that form and illustrate these different runtime modes. And again, when you're finished with that, you go back and complete the rest of chapter 2, reading the text, doing the labs, etc., etc. So I'll see you on lecture 3.